Got Chad Carlson from Hope College with me today. Chad, thanks for taking the time.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, cool. I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity a little bit. Chad has a podcast that I've been a longtime listener of, and got to listen to him. Got to meet him at a conference a few weeks ago, so I'm excited for the conversation. But Chad, let's start with you. You've coached at a lot of different levels. You're now a professor at Hope College. Give us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the space you're in of studying sport, teaching it, and staying connected.
Yeah, maybe it's a slow road downhill for me, I guess. What's the old adage that if you can't do something, you teach it, right? And then if you can't teach it, I don't know, if you can't do that level, you do the meta teaching, which is essentially what I'm doing right now, right? So started as an athlete, became a coach, just thought that that was kind of the natural progression once my sport playing days were over, and just kind of saw that as the best way to stay involved in sport, a thing that I loved. And then through some acts of God's grace, ended up getting some graduate degrees related to sport. And so now I teach sports studies classes as my primary occupation, and I coach on the side now. So a lot of what we're doing in our sports studies classes is talking to students about leadership in the world of sport. And one of those classes focuses specifically on coaching. Um, but others are talking about sort of leadership more broadly. And I think obviously a really important part of coaching is leadership. And so that's why I sort of say that tongue in cheek that, whereas once I was a sports player, right, an athlete, then did some coaching, and I still do coaching just because I enjoy it. It's part of my DNA. But at the moment, my primary occupation has to do with teaching others that will be eventually leaders in the sport industry, coaches or elsewise.
So the students you work with, why do you think they want to enter coaching? Tell us about their backgrounds and motivations.
I get the sense that that's just kind of culturally expected, right? So you see that many really good players in particular sports end up coaching, or at least those who want to stay in sport. This is the best route, right, to get into coaching because there's so many opportunities to do that. I actually get more joy out of convincing students that don't see themselves as coaches that they will one day become coaches. If they see themselves ever as being parents, there's a pretty good chance that they're gonna they're gonna be on the sidelines at some point as a coach, right? And so it's fun for me to sort of spur their imaginations in that way. Well, even if I don't see myself as a coach, there might be times when I'm in that space, or as a parent or as a fan, we're regularly critiquing coaches, right? And we ought to be um, well informed to be able to do that well, also. So I, I think the motivations are sometimes among college students, and Rob, you understand this too, being in a higher education setting, is that I think sometimes we're in the business of helping students to imagine what their motivations might be, or to actually articulate what those motivations are for whatever it is they want to pursue. And coaching is wonderful, and I would never talk a student out of coaching as an intended profession. I also want them to know that there's a lot expected of coaches, right? Increasingly more, it seems like, by the year, by the season, whatever else. To do coaching well, you really have to invest in your athletes, and at lower ages, the families as well.
I think here's a half-formed thought for you, and then critique it for me. But I feel like it's in some ways we both make our living in sport in some shape or form. But the importance of coaches, I think, are becoming more important culturally, societally, as our perspective of sport or our value of sport grows in unhealthy ways. Respond to that for me.
Yeah, I think there's this is not a question I expected to be. This is great, Rob. These half-formed thoughts. I'll be able to give a half-formed answer here, so I'll do the
Cool.
best I
Well,
can.
thanks for tolerating it.
So yeah, we really kind of heroize coaches, and I don't know that that's a new phenomenon that we see coaches as you know kind of leaders, and that comes from probably in some sense like the military basis for a lot of the modern sport that we experience. someone who can command, who can be in control, who can lead young people, and especially today, coaches in our most popular sports who oftentimes, like football and basketball, are oftentimes, but not certainly not solely, older white men who can sort of command um, younger athletes who are diverse in many different ways and different from who they are, to be able to connect with a different generation of people, and especially those who are super talented and in the prime of their lives, to be able to speak truth into their lives or speak something into their lives seems to be something that we value. And so it's probably oftentimes unhealthy worship, where we put coaches on a pedestal. Maybe you can see, behind my head in the background of my office, I have all these, they're these old all-star figures of athletes, mostly baseball players. But the big one in the back is Joe Paterno. Someone gave me a Joe Paterno statue, right? And when I graduated from Penn State. So I've got this little mini statue of Joe Paterno. And of course, that was before the Sandusky scandal and everything else came out. But I spent a number of years in Happy Valley in an area where Joe Paterno was essentially every person's adopted grandfather, right? I mean, he had just always been around, always been a presence in the lives of Penn State students and people in central Pennsylvania, just because of the way they, the rhythms of their lives were dictated by Penn State football, and the fact that he always seemed to stand for something beyond the sport. At least, locally, the library was named in his honor. He was, the old story was that he went to the provost at one point in time, said, we can't cut our classics program, even though there's very few majors in it. Like, I will personally fund a classics program, otherwise I'm leaving this college, right? I can't be a football coach at a college that doesn't have a great humanities program. So he stood for all these things that were beyond sport, and people saw him as a leader, the leader, a great leader. And then all of this came crashing down at the end of his career, of course, and which happened to be the end of his life. And so I think there's a little bit of a cautionary tale there about what we expect out of our coaches and what our coaches are capable of. And it probably is a good reminder for those of us that live within the creeds of the Christian faith to be able to understand really that there's a huge difference between our favorite coach and the Trinitarian Godhead that we love, worship, and adore.
That's really well
How's
said.
that for a half-formed answer?
That didn't sound half formed to me. But it's such an interesting balance of, like, I feel like whenever I'm hiring a coach, you ask people what they're looking for, our kids what they're looking for, people in our community, and I mean, more or less, we're saying Jesus, and that role is so important because the respect it commands culturally, but also understanding that that person's human. And I feel like that's the training of coaches that can be hard. Of, you have this immense power, you need to use it for good, but also understand you're going to screw up. And creating space for all those things, I think, can be a challenge.
As part of the faith formation process or the character formation process or whatever it is we're after or calling it, that necessitates that we make mistakes at times. And as coaches, for better or for worse, our mistakes are for the public to see, and oftentimes they're easy to quantify. We make mistakes and we lose games. We make mistakes and we lose players, right? We make mistakes and our team goes into a slump. And so it's there, it's out in the open, it's exposed. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. At least there's a simplicity to it and transparency that I always appreciated. But it also kept me up at night more than my cushy nerf academic life at the moment, where if I have a bad lecture, it's just the 25 students in the class that see it, and none of them are critiquing me publicly. Maybe they are. I don't see, but I have the opportunity to move forward and learn from it in a safer space than what a coach has to deal with.
I joke with people. So my prior career, I was a college baseball coach before I got into administration. One of the things I don't miss in the slightest about coaching is losing control of my emotions and needing to go and apologize to somebody every week. Even that, when you mix competition and passion and all this kind of stuff, I had to learn how to apologize. But I felt like at times there was this pressure to be perfect as a coach, and when I failed, I had to learn to give myself that space. And I'm not certainly not perfect now, but it's nice having a little more cushion outside the competitive sphere to react accordingly.
I told you that my main calling is in the academic world, but I still dabble in coaching. And so at the moment, I'm part of the coaching staff of a high school basketball program where my daughter goes to school. I was actually the assistant for her varsity girls basketball coach, right? And I coached her JV high school team last year, and it was really interesting what was expected. I had not been doing scholastic coaching in 6 or 7 years before I stepped back into it last year. I had been coaching my kids in youth recreational sports, but I mean, the stakes are, I guess, as high as you want them to be in youth recreational sport. But I hadn't been in the scholastic setting for a few years, and so I stepped into that. And I would say I pride myself on never sort of losing my emotions related to a particular player, right? I feel like I treat my players well. I'm not prone to fits of emotional outbursts, especially to my players. I've never been that way, but uh, there's another type of person that's seemingly at every event where I'm coaching, an official, right? And that's where I find I'm in need of God's grace in certain ways. But one of the funny things about stepping back into this coaching, right? Coaching my daughter's JV high school team. A couple of games in, we were getting blown out by a really good team. We knew we were going to lose to that team, and the emotions were high because the other team kept pressing us, and they were clearly better than us. They were up by 30 some points or whatever late in the game. And so I wasn't feeling terribly good about myself as a coach. I don't think the parents in the stands were feeling great about their kids as players. I don't think the kids were feeling great about themselves. Probably nobody's feeling great about me as the coach. And I wasn't feeling great about the officials crew, who I'd had a bit of a history with. Just had, they had refed, my games as a coach and a player way back in the day. So there were some that I knew and wasn't terribly crazy about. And I had just been riding them a little bit more than I'm comfortable with, mostly because I wasn't feeling very good about how my team was playing. I was mad at the other team's coach and probably taking some of this out on the referee. So finally, one of the refs from across the court blows his whistle and stops the game and says, "I've had enough," and comes over and gives me a technical foul. And my face got red. I was super embarrassed, right? I mean, the whole game has to stop, and the referee, who's older than me, has to come over to me, a guy in his mid-40s, around among teenagers, and say, "Hey, you're out of line. I can't let the game go on until I tell you that you need to get back into control." And what kind of model am I for my players, these 15-year-old girls? And so he comes over and gives me a technical, and I sit down, and the parents of my players stand up and start cheering for me. And after the game, they all came up and congratulated me and were so happy for what I had done. And I was blown away. I mean, what are they expecting me to do? This was a moment of shame for me, really,
Mm-hmm.
that my behavior was such that I had to be reprimanded by another adult. I'm an adult in the room, much less one that teaches ethics. I mean, I should be the moral exemplar here, and yet all these parents, I'm one too, right? We're all crazy when it comes to youth sports, but they were so happy for me, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it was. I think that in some sense, they saw me as standing up for the players, um, in a way that elicited, a slap on the wrist from the referees, but it got to that level. That I think they appreciated that. There's something about that was just kind of weird and backward in my mind. And I don't know if I want to read too much into that, because part of it was just, I think, parents just oftentimes want reasons to talk to the coach and to say nice things to the coach, on behalf of their child. There's a lot of that too, brown nosing. But I just felt like that was what they expected of a coach, and that just isn't the way I want to coach. But I think there's a lot of that parents and athletes see that coach as being their emotional leader, and because of the ways that they live into the world of sport on such an emotional roller coaster, they expect the coaches will do the same thing. And I'm just usually not wired that way. I'll get as positive as anybody and as animated as anybody when we do things really well, but I'm certainly not wanting to be in the business of dressing down other adults who are getting paid to try to officiate our games, so that we can have games. So that was a really a really interesting moment for me stepping back into that sphere of sports that I had been a part of throughout much of my life. But um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you have a response to that either. The story I just told.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have our moments like that we go back to. But I have two thoughts. One is I've never heard anybody talk about a great officials by and large. It's a hard job. People are dissatisfied. And I think part of that is because it violates our sense of justice. We're emotionally invested and we should get the calls right. And we perceive that that doesn't happen. And somebody needs to stand up for this injustice. And
Yeah, yeah,
there's this actually a lot when I was coaching, I lost one team where when the players I just felt like didn't buy into me. And it was actually an athletes in action team in the Alaska Baseball League. And it was with a few players where I wouldn't stand up for them by going to scream at officials. And it was, I share similar feelings what you just shared. But yeah, there's this weird interaction of justice, and somebody needs to go solve that for us. Um, the other kind of weird thought I had, I've been having this discussion with fellow AD Jesse Gotting at Nelson University, where stay with me for a second, but so video review has just entered our level at the NAI level where we're reviewing calls, all this kind of stuff. And I think on a totally idealistic academic level, it's disappointing that we have to have it because 95% of the time everybody knows the right call. And the player should just say, yeah, it was out on me. Let's move on. And then Jesse brought up, are we losing in Division One sports, NBA? I get it. There's a lot of money on the line, all this kind of stuff. But are we losing this opportunity with sports as an educational vehicle, as a character development, faith development vehicle, to have to deal with those things? Because a bad call, somebody treating you not how you want, all that kind of stuff, I could argue if done well, that's something sport can really teach us well. Um, but it's insanely difficult. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts as you're talking of I'm glad you're human like me, but there's this justice piece that kind of goes into it all. I don't know. What do you think of that?
yeah. No, absolutely. I think you're right. And I don't know why we get so bothered by the trivial injustices that occur in sports. I mean, I'll yell at a referee, when I think there's an injustice there. But I would say, when the township that I live in, put something on the ballot that's gonna maybe hurt my property value, which would be a tangible loss for me. I don't get nearly as I mean I'm not going to
Yeah,
yell at people for that, right? So the the level of injustice that we get so mad about in sports seems like there's an imbalance there. But I think you're onto something there. I think that's important. And such is the difficulty of the faith and character formation of people in the world of sport, especially sport that is adjudicated by an external person, right? By an official. That you have somebody there telling you what's allowed and not allowed, what is, appropriate action and not appropriate action, what's right and wrong, and when you break the rules, as opposed to, I suppose, a sport. And I certainly don't want to like heroize golf, a sport like golf or tennis, where most of the time you're calling your own, and that leads to a whole other, set of issues. But in a sport that's refereed or umpired, there's definitely, reliance upon something else to tell me, to tell the players, the athletes, the coaches, when they're acting right and when they're not acting right. And wouldn't it be great if we got to the point where, like you said, when there's a controversial call, we would have a player that's a moral agent to be able to say, yeah, I mean, this is what happened.
yeah.
It's out on
It's
it's out
on
on
me.
me, or yeah, or I was right there. I saw it was foul. Clearly it was there, and I had a closer look than the umpire did. And we're not always right, but I think there's something about being able to, to call it on ourselves. And some sports do a better job of cultivating that kind of ethos than others. And I don't even know that I would say necessarily, as someone who studies sport, that if are you are 100% certain that a call that went in your favor that shouldn't have gone in your favor, that you should be someone that should actually tell the referee or somebody else, actually, no, you got it wrong. The right call actually puts me at a disadvantage. I don't even know that I would support that necessarily at all times, but I do think there's something about our willingness to step into that space to say, you know what, this is what I think happened. and I want to act rightly, even if it's going to disadvantage me, because for the integrity of the process.
So I'm going back to the story you shared, and if we're looking at as coaches as moral exemplars, I think and to teach character, all these kind of things, I think those moments that you had are probably the most powerful because it's, hey, I screwed up. Here's how I wish I would have acted. Here's how I was feeling. I'm going to do better next time. I don't know if there can be a more powerful teaching tool. Now, I'm not telling everybody, hey, go screw up all the time, but if we're dive into a little bit just like character formation and teaching in sport, I think that's a big piece. But yeah, tell what do you see when it's done well?
There's definitely, I mean, I think what you're getting at is something that I've noticed in some of the best coaches that I've been around, and as a player, as a coach myself, or for my own kids, when the coach is acting and speaking in such a way that the players, without even being able to articulate it or even recognizing it, are saying the same things that the coach does, or acting the same way that the coach does, I think. And if that's all good stuff, I think you've got a really nice recipe there, right? So it's one thing for a coach to be able to get kids to buy into what they're asking them to do. And so, players that will follow a coach, there's something about the leadership there, that leadership aspect of coaching, that a coach can do really well. So once your players start, using the same language you are and seeing the game the same way that you are, that's really good from a leadership perspective. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily all virtuous or good stuff, right? You could have a coach that's actually a terrible human being, but somebody that gets players to follow them as leaders, and do the things that they do. So if you have a coach that's a good leader like that, but also has a really strong, moral or faith-based set of values, then that's the recipe you want, right? Where you want the opportunities for you want players doing things that the coach is doing, right? Because naturally they're going to gravitate to that if they see them as a good leader. And if those are all good things, that's a great opportunity to be formed in a really positive way, right? That would show sport at its best, its most moral optimal. And yet, to get at your question specifically, right? Thinking about when we screw up, um, I think you're right. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to show our players that, hey, I made a mistake on this one. And I've even had times when I've shown up at practice the day after a game and said, hey, you know what? I think I actually hurt us in the last game. The game plan that we had was misguided, and here's where I thought we went wrong, and I did something wrong. And I've had times where I've gone up to players the next day and said, hey, you know what? I really think you could have helped us more than I allowed you to. And so I apologize for not putting you in a better situation. I think I do that sometimes. Maybe my motivations aren't always right and good, but I think a good coach will do that at times to motivate and inspire. I think a good coach will do that at times just because it's right. And it's a way to develop rapport, and it's a way for, to help to motivate a player who's a little bit maybe down in the dumps, relative to their spot on the team. And I also don't want to, I think about what you and I've talked about in the past about the importance of a coach being authentic. And so I'm not ever going to do that as, just a tool to try to motivate a player when I don't actually see that as being a likely outcome. But I certainly think it helps in so many different ways. And sports are spaces where we are formed, like so many other places in our lives. But because we're so emotionally invested, there's a great deal of formation that goes on. And so showing your players what it's like to take ownership when things don't go well, showing your players how to win with grace and try to deflect the praise to others. I mean, those are all things that are part and parcel of being a good sports person. And that's probably a part of a coach's role that we oftentimes undervalue for those who do it well.
Mhm. Let's dive into this formation piece a little more. I wrote about it a little bit. Here's a struggle I have, and you're a lot smarter than me, so hopefully you can help me figure this out. So the tension, I feel such tension of the competitive side and wanting to win, and I'm still embarrassed. I'm 42. I've been an AD for 10 years. And on some of the bad losses, I'm ticked going home. And I'm embarrassed that I feel like that a little bit. The flip side is the most growth and formation, positive formation I see out of the sport experience comes from the struggle. Like the kid that doesn't have the role they want and they stick with it, or the team doesn't have the season they want, but the coach leads well. The team really rallies around that and works through the hard. That's where I see the most formational type things happen. But it's not as fun as winning. So, how do you reconcile those two things and dive into? I know we both have a passion for faith formation within sport. Kind of, there's a wide range of comment to get you going.
Yeah. Embracing the hard. I find that every season that I'm coaching, every season that I've ever coached, I get to a point, it's probably about 2/3 of the way through the season, maybe a little bit beyond that, where I always think, you know what, this is probably the last time I'm going to do this. I just need to, I can't keep doing this. It's so, it's an emotional roller coaster. I'm exhausted. When I stepped into coaching, girls high school basketball last year, and now I did again this year, I took up drinking coffee. I mean, I was emotionally exhausted in a way that I had never been in the past, and so coffee was my antidote. But um, I always then get to a point a couple weeks after the season's done, and sometimes it's just days after the season ends, where I look back on it and I think, wow, I, I just loved seeing where we got to from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. And I've always had that feeling. And I think that that speaks to one of the things that's a conviction of mine, which is I care about, the team developing as a team. And so that's important to me. It's just so fun to see the growth, right? And for a number of years, I coached the JV men's basketball team at Hope College, which is a non-glamorous role. It was really like at the time when I did this in the early 2000s and the early 20 teens, it was like me and John Calipari and a few other coaches were always taking this, coaching college basketball and taking this. It was every year a totally new group of young men and trying to mold them together as one team. And none of them wanted to be there for very long because they all wanted to move up to the next thing, right? And John Calipari's players obviously wanted to get to the NBA, needed to get theirs in order to get to the NBA. My guys came to Hope College wanting to play on the varsity team. So they play on my JV team. They didn't want to be there, but they needed, they wanted to get theirs in order to be on the varsity team. But I would look back at the growth that we had bringing these different guys together that had never played together before. And, you got 5 months with them, 4 months with them. And just to see the growth and then to look back fondly on the really difficult moments. Like I loved looking back on those moments because they were so hard. And I think they were so good for me as a coach to have to live through those things too, that like these issues are not just going to solve themselves. I mean, as a coach, I have to speak into these things in order for change to occur. And the times that I didn't do that, like those are the players that I wasn't as close with. Those are the players that don't come back and talk or send email updates, semi regularly. But the players that I had the more difficult time with, the players that I really had to intentionally step into hard conversations with, and that I felt like I was always wrestling with during the seasons, like those are the ones for whom there was more growth. And it didn't always get to the point where I wanted, and it wasn't always anything that they or I saw in the moment. And we there were times when we just agreed that we were just going to disagree, right? And weren't going to see things eye to eye. But those hard moments, those hard seasons, the hard times within the seasons, those are so valuable for learning and growing. And I'm thinking about coaching my son's travel basketball team. He's an 8th grader this past winter. And it was a team of guys that were just competitors. I mean, they were dogs, just they would get after it, whether it was with each other or other teams. And that was great. But man, they were terrible losers. When we lost games, I mean, it looked like, and their body language was awful, awful, awful. And I felt like that was a reflection on me, and it was really hard. And I got to the point where I wasn't enjoying going to practices with them or going to games. But by the end of the season, to have parents kind of come up and say, I'm seeing some growth, right? And you're letting my kid grow in giving them space to do so. And I realize my kid's a hard one to coach, and they're kind of difficult behavior wise, and And so looking back on it, I love all of that because of the formation. But there's more opportunity for formation when we're at when we have a lower starting point, right?
Yeah.
Jesus said he
Well,
came to, said that the healthy don't need a doctor; it's the sick that need a doctor, right? And I think in the world of sport, there's really some value there in taking people who who don't have others speaking truth into their lives from a behavior, moral, faith perspective, and being able to do so and walk alongside them as they are experiencing the joy of sport, but all the other emotions that come with sport too, and just just staying with it. There's some habituation there that's so beautiful over time, and the value of a college sports season, or any season now, is that they're so long that you can see legitimate change because you're not just dealing with 6 or 8 week seasons. This is months and months and months. So long answer to your question there, Rob. But this has come to me to be like, this is the most important thing for me, and also the hardest thing for me, is embracing what's difficult about these sports seasons.
you said a lot of good stuff there. Some that caught me. I think I've thought, but I've never heard people say out loud. And I think it's probably most coaches. There's a point in the season you're like, I don't want to ever do this again. That's
Yeah,
almost
yeah.
that's just part of the season process. Yeah, but yeah, a lot of good stuff. I want to, as we start to wrap up, you have an organization called Sport Faith Life. Talk about that and the work you're doing there with the podcast, the Global Congress, all that kind of stuff.
A colleague of mine at Calvin University, which is a rival school of ours, Brian Bolt, and I hosted the second Global Congress on Sport and Christianity in 2019 in Grand Rapids, Michigan, an event you attended, Rob. And so we sort of started Sport Faith Life as an offshoot of that uh, event, because it happened every 3 years, right? And so there was just gaps between the first Global Congress and the second one and the third one. There's these 3 year periods where we haven't, we lose our growing and emerging community. So Sport Faith Life was created after the 2019 event in order to continue cultivating conversations and community at the intersection of sport and Christian faith. So we've hosted a podcast since 2019. We're on episode 141. Pretty proud of that, and proud of the growth in those. Right, we're still amateurs, but we literally actually started doing this out of Brian's mom's basement, and it sounded like a podcast that somebody would do out of their mom's basement. Right, it wasn't it wasn't great, but we've had some fantastic guests on the podcast, yourself included. We just love interviewing people and learning about what they do, and it gets beyond coaching and athletes, right? We're talking with faculty members, we're talking about with authors, we're talking with sport administrators, missionaries, people doing any number of things related to sport and Christianity. But Brian and I are both, hybrid academics and practitioners. We're both faculty members, professors that are teaching and doing research. We're also both coaches, and that's just in our bones. And so we love talking to people that have all these different interests and experiences within the world of sport and Christianity. And we want to give them a space to tell their story. We want to be able to promote the good things that they're doing. That's what Sport Faith Life is. And then every 3 years, we're helping to lead an event called the Global Congress on Sport and Christianity.
So one correction, I've never been to the Global Congress. One of our coaches tried to get me go to the one at Calvin, I think, and I just wasn't able to, but I'm planning on attending the next one. I'm hoping I can do the Europe one just because that sounds like a lot of fun and bring my wife with me. Um,
Well, you've caught me in an embarrassing mistake. I could have
yeah,
sworn I saw your name on that list.
yeah,
I can't remember. I'm old enough now that I have enough lists in my mind to where I know I've seen your name on something like that. But
yeah.
anyways, we missed you at that one.
Dean might have even registered me trying to get me to go, Dean Jaderston, but I wish I was
That could
there.
be. That could be. Yeah, well, we missed you then.
So you've done all that work. Give me one or two takeaways as you've dove deeper and deeper into to faith and sport. I mean, what are the trends you're seeing? What are you learning? Just yeah.
Just because we're Christians doesn't mean it's easier for us to act well in the world of sport. And I think sometimes it's harder for us to act well in the world of sport. One of the things that keeps coming up for me when I'm talking with people in these spaces, doing research, acting as a practitioner, a coach, a parent of sports, is, nobody's immune from getting caught up in the emotions of sport, positively or negatively, right? No, nobody's immune from it, even though there are moments when we are stronger than other moments. I need to continually remind myself when I enter the gym, the arena, wherever it is, I need to remind myself whose I am when I step into those spaces. And I need to remind myself what my goals are when I enter into those spaces. Because if I'm not keeping that front of mind, I will lose my mind and I will lose my telos, my end, my goal, my aim. And so it's a difficult thing for me, even somebody who's, I study sport, that's my job, right? I think about sport all day long. That's my job. And yet, for me, I need to protect my heart when I enter into the arena or the gymnasium. It's a really hard thing to do, and I don't think I'm alone. But oftentimes, just sort of articulating that which is above and beyond what we're after here is so important. It's important for coaches. What is it that I'm after here? What's my number one goal, right? What am I called to do as a coach? As a parent, why am I here supporting my child? What is it that my child wants out of this experience? All of those things are so important for us to keep sport in perspective for us. Because if we don't think about those things and have conversations about those things regularly, we will become rudderless and we will get blown into the winds. And those winds are not healthy ones in the world of sport, right? You get to see the implications of that regularly in the job that you do. So that's maybe the number one thing for me when I talk to uh, lay audiences about sport is really thinking about guarding, protecting our hearts, um, and that seems to resonate pretty well with people, right? Even the strongest Christians, the people that seem like they'll get through St. Peter's gates with no problem, right? Even those sometimes have a hard time with the competitive structures of the us and them structures of sport. So that's always been an important thing for me when I'm thinking and talking about sport and Christianity.
That resonates deeply with me. I mean, gosh, there's times I'm just so disappointed, even if I don't say it, just what I'm feeling in my heart in the moments of
Yes,
competition. That just,
right.
yeah, yeah, that's really
Yeah,
well said.
thanks.
Well, I'm gonna end it there, but we always wrap up with a rapid fire round where we ask 4 or 5 questions, and you only have 30 seconds or less to answer unless it's really good. Uh,
Let's go. All right.
so, all right, what's your favorite book and why?
Outside of the Bible, it's a book called The Grasshopper. It's the philosophy of games, written by a sport philosopher. The first book I read in grad school called The Grasshopper. The idea is that um, it's a definition of what games are, game playing is, and why that's actually the most important thing that we could ever do as humans. Fascinating book, The Grasshopper.
Grasshopper. You can't say your podcast or mine. Favorite podcast.
I'm getting really excited because I'm about to leave on spring break with my family. We drive through the night, and I'll take the worst shifts in the middle of the night, and so I always, get to load my favorite podcast. I actually am kind of a sucker for the Art of Manliness podcast, which is a long standing show. That's one of my favorites.
For a coach on this question, how would you define success?
My first answer is the world's answer. It's wins and losses. It's hard for me to get beyond that, although I know I need to. Wins and losses is important. Um, when I talk to my youth sport kids that I coach, especially younger kids, and when I talk to parents and youth sport coaches about this as well, I'll say there's really 3 S's that are most important, right? At the end of a practice session with little kids, I want to see smiles. That's important. I want to see sweat. That means that they've engaged physically vigorously. And I want to see skills grow. So those 3 S's. And I learned that from a buddy of mine in grad school who also coaches his kids in a lot of sports, the 3 S's, smiles, sweat, and skills.
Nice. Okay, last one. I'll say it twice because make sure you understand it. In the last 5 years, what behavior or habit has most improved your life? So, in the last 5 years, what behavior or habit has most improved your life?
Yeah. One of the things I do on campus right now is I'm the director of the Character Hub, which is we're implementing a grant that we've received from Wake Forest Educating Character Initiative. And so I get to do work on gratitude and generosity. And I will say practicing gratitude has been the number one thing for me. to help me live well, practicing gratitude, sending thank you notes to people, just saying thank you regularly. I sign off almost every email by saying thanks, whether the email elicits a thanks or not. That's been the number one thing for me. And I learned that from my college basketball coach, even though I haven't practiced it, for all of my adult life. But at the end of every season, we sat down as a team and wrote thank you notes to people who had supported us in our endeavors at college. So I was writing to parents, writing to siblings, writing to grandparents, writing to our athletic trainers, writing to the ticket office people, writing to, everybody we could think of. That was a really, that was a practice that was really impressionable on me.
Well, Chad, thanks so much for doing this. I feel like I've learned a lot from you and appreciate your perspective.
Right back at you, Rob. This has been fantastic. Thanks so much for the time.
Yeah, so we'll put your email address in the show notes. So if people have any questions on this conversation or you want to learn more about the work Chad's doing, please reach out. So thank you
Let's
very
talk.
much.
Well, thanks for having me, Rob. Appreciate it.